Hi, hi, hi. Welcome back to the Entangled Health Podcast. As always, it's me, your host, Madison Murphy Barney, and I am calling in or talking to you from the mountain that I live on that is now officially snow-free as of recording this on April 27th. So that feels like a huge victory. There's sun shining, and it's always amazing. Like every time the sun comes out, I say it every year. I'm like, I thought I was doing great. And then the sun comes and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is what great feels like. What a joy. So I hope the sun is reaching you where you are. I recently got an email from Transitor, which is like where the podcast sort of, I don't know, I think of it as like the hub, and then it goes out to all of the spokes from there, that there are folks in 25 countries listening to the Entangled Health podcast. And that was such a joy. And I'm just so grateful you all are here with me, with us. And wanted to share that there are a few Story Lab sessions still left for the quarter. They're flying off the shelf. So if you want to get scheduled for your Story Lab session, again, that's a session where we spend a couple of hours together. I do the prep, I do the research, and I just come in and ask you and your brilliant team questions, and then come back to you with all of the opportunities I see and like a couple year roadmap for how you can integrate deep listening, community engagement, and storytelling into your existing operations, as well as opportunities for building out extended operations. And yeah, and so they're completely tailored, completely just for you, and they are selling like hotcakes. So do come through and reach out if you'd like to book one, and we'll get you on the calendar for the rest of the quarter. And it's wild to think, we're almost halfway through the year, and so it's a great time to sort of stop and look and see, where these opportunities are, how to reorient, redirect a little bit, and how to. I think the main thing that I love so much about them, right, is that it's like getting a better understanding of what's possible with what you already have, and not some sort of strategy that's like asking you to reinvent the wheel, but more so, here's all the assets that you have, the people that you have, the systems and operations that you have. Like, how do we strengthen those and use those to further implement, the community engagement and the impact that you are really looking for and that you came to this work for. So that's where that all is. Do reach out if you'd like to find a time for a session. And this episode that we're going to dive into now is a continuation of the lessons from the from other species on the importance and the ways that we can learn from them as we do strategy work and community engagement work. And as I've said in the other episodes, I just think it's so important and helpful to remember that we have all of these blueprints in other species and across our world of things that work well, and reciprocity, and all of these values and sentiments that we want to live out in our work also are lived out in the natural world. And so this week we're going to be talking about the three sisters. And maybe you're familiar with the three sisters, maybe not. Three sisters are really the the cornerstone of so much of Indigenous agriculture systems, and at least in the last 3,000 years, as far as we know. And the three sisters are three different species. They're corn, beans, and squash, and they're planted together in the same mound. And they're like this brilliant technology, and they protect each other and support each other and grow brilliantly together. And it's just like the most amazing relationship. And I think it's a relationship I really want to bring out on this series that we're doing with lessons from the natural world. Because when we can learn from them and incorporate those, that idea of like it takes all kinds and it takes, collaboration to do the work we want to do, it, we get so much further than when we get sort of stuck in our single operating system. So, the three sisters, are really personified as these three inseparable sisters who love and support each other. Corn is the eldest. If you're planting three sisters mounds, as I do in my garden, corn goes first. You plant the corn first, and the corn stands tall and supports her siblings. And then the beans are that giving middle sister who nourishes the soil and the family. And the squash is that protective younger sister who shields her siblings from threats. So, I really think of them as sort of like equity, thriving, and reciprocity, and the ways that they show us how to support each other in ways that we each need and to lean on each other and to allow our gifts to support the full ecosystem, since our work is so bound up in each other, right? Like none of us is working in silos. And we often know what happens when we start to work in silos is how challenging it can get and how out of sorts we can get. And, how we can't quite do the work we came here to do if we're sort of isolated on our own. So, a little bit more on the biology. So, the corn grows really tall and provides that sort of natural pull for the beans to climb. If you've ever grown beans or seen how beans grow, you can see they kind of like vine up and twist around and really thrive in having something to climb. And then, as the bean climbs up the corn stalks, they add nitrogen to the soil through their nitrogen fixing bacteria. And this nitrogen fixing bacteria is really healthy for the soil and also benefits all three plants. They all really need this. And then what the squash does, once added, that youngest sister, it's the squash spreads along the ground and creates this living mulch that suppresses weeds and retains soil moisture, and really deters pests. If you've ever garden squash or pick squash, you know that like the vines and even the stem, if you buy it at the store, has those prickles on it, and that's really protective. And so it protects all three of them from pests and rodents and curious other creatures and toddlers and everybody else. So, together when they're grown this way, they're more space efficient, right? Like the bean climbs the corn, the squash grows around, so it really creates a space efficient and then also drought resistant, that shade that's brought on by the squash, those big squash, beautiful leaves that we all see, and and that nitrogen fixing and those that sort of like nutritionally complete. These three together create this like completeness in nutrition that's so important and so nourishing. And, the corn provides carbohydrates but don't have the amino acids. The beans have the amino acids and the protein, and the squash has those delicious vitamins and minerals and healthy oils. So, different tribes and nations adapted the technique in their local climates. And so, there's different beans are used in different places, how things are planted. But yeah, it's that most traditional when you think or hear about the three sisters. It's the corn goes first, and then the beans wrap around, and then the squash comes third as the youngest sister. Um, and so, what does this what does this have to do with strategy work? So, so much in my mind, so much. So, it shows that these different contributions have this contribute to this shared thriving, right? The three sisters, as I mentioned, they don't all do the same thing. That corn has the structure, the beans nourish, the squash protects and keeps out pests. And that's what I really think of when I think of like when I'm working with clients who are in part of collectives or are, collaborating with other teams or even, with me. Like that's a collaboration as well, where everyone can bring their strengths and have that leadership in coalition. And, the best work we do is when we're not all at the same table doing the same work. We want that each partner contributing to what they're built to contribute, what they're best suited to contribute. And I talked about this a lot when I was talking about urgency at an organizational level and how urgency is so counterintuitive to effectiveness and impact. And we can't quite have the impact we want if we're just like in urgency all the time. It keeps us sort of in this like clouded brain space. And this really makes me think of that. And as a part of that conversation, I was saying, part of this requires us to get really clear at what we are the expert in, what it is that we can contribute to as an individual or as an organization, so that we're not trying to do everything at once. Because if we're trying to do everything, we're doing nothing well, and then we are certainly not in service of our communities, right? We need to be in our zone of genius, as they call it, and doing what only we can do. And so this mindset of the three sisters is this trusting and this understanding in the ecosystem of I will contribute what I am best, conditioned to contribute and conditioned and designed and qualified to contribute. And I can trust that the other partners will do the same and that we can make this beautiful ecosystem. But again, like we can't actually nourish and support and serve our communities if we're trying to be many things that we're not, right? We need um, to be of service in the ways that we're best positioned to be of service, and then collaborate with others. And that collaboration can mean hiring, it can mean partnerships, it can mean coalition building, it can mean so many things. It can mean mutual aid. It's not just like this idea, I think so often when we talk about collaboration, it's a little bit like how we talk about community, and we use the word so much that we sort of lose the plot of like what it actually looks like. But there's so many ways that we can, different ways that we can collaborate and make sure that everyone in the room, that we have all of the expertise we need in the room or on the board or in the coalition, and not get too caught up in um, trying to fill gaps and things like that on our own, but more so looking at where are the gaps and who are the geniuses who we want to bring in to fill those gaps. So the next thing that the three sisters really teach me a lot about and I bring into my strategy work that I do is the importance of reciprocity and not extraction. So, the beans don't just climb the corn and take from the corn. They fix the nitrogen in the soil that feeds everything. And the squash don't just, come in later and benefit from the corn and the beans having gotten their start ahead of them. They instead contribute the protection when things are the most vulnerable and small. The squash come in to protect and keep the trio safe and nourished. And they're benefiting, yes, from the corn and the beans, but they're also on their own, just doing of service to the trio as well. That's why they're so sort of woven in as a trio and each contributes so much. And there's this real symbiosis. And I think about this so often, you hear me go on and on and on about the extractive storytelling that happens, and then like ethical storytelling and deep listening and deep community engagement, and the process of gathering stories in a way that also builds trust and brings forth strategy and strengthens the community's narrative capacity and like feeds and feeds and feeds the system. And that's so different from this like urgency based sort of extractive tokenized listening and storytelling. It's not even listening, it's like somehow I've come into many organizations and seen that they've found a way to do storytelling without listening, which should never, we never want that in the room, no matter what. And so, I think about this too is we want to make sure that everything that we introduce into our communities, especially if it's this, deep listening and story gathering that becomes strategy, that becomes operation change, that becomes programmatic change, we really want to make sure that that that's a reciprocal exchange, right? We want to make sure that it's not extractive in any way. And that in by doing it and by doing it well and by doing it intentionally, we are supporting the community and that we are here to serve and connecting with them and building that trust that then increases our impact. And as we know, when impact is increased, we get the eyes of people who want to fund that work and policymakers and decision makers. And so it really, that reciprocity, it's not like, I think sometimes the misconception is that it takes too much time or isn't worthwhile. But the reality is the outcomes of what happens when we build that reciprocity and don't come in with extractive practices is when we're really on track for that, like really deep, rich, like culture changing, org changing work that we all want to be doing. And something else that I learned, which is this is the hardest lesson for me to like embody from the three sisters, is the importance of sequence, right? Sequence matters. As I've said a couple times, you can't just plant everything at once. The corn goes first. And then that's the structure, right? So you put in your structure first. And that's the work we do in visioning sessions before the strategy, right? I always say, like, the worst thing we can do is like build a strategy and then be like, okay, we're going to work towards a strategy. Like, we need to understand what's happening already, put structures in place and understand for that listening, for that understanding, for that gathering time and understand that. And those are our structures. And that's why I think, and this can seem like it'll be like a long or challenging process, but as I've mentioned before, like those story lab sessions that we do are, 3 hours, and then you can be set forth and you've got the structure you need, and then that's your corn stalk, and then From there, the listening has to, and the listening happens. And we do that deep listening, and that sort of the being growing and nourishing the soil, and that trust building, and that coming to know each other and coming to understand each other and coming to understand what our community needs and wants, and understanding their wisdom. And that's that sort of soil nourishment, that the structure that you need the structure in order to do well. And then, finally, with the squash comes in with that sort of like protection. So then you're using all the information that you've had and you have this trust built, and then you're using it to keep your community safe, keep your community healthy, keep your community nourished by building strategies and making programmatic tweaks and understand, moving forward in a way that takes all of that learning and that nourished soil into consideration, and protects it as well. So if you try to plant all three at once, it doesn't, that symbiosis isn't able to happen. We have to understand the order and understand that that sequence really matters and why it matters and why it's worthwhile taking the time to go one, two, three rather than all at once. Um, and I mentioned this a little bit before too, right? Of this like nutritional completeness. No of the three sisters has everything that we need. There's no, and that's true, right? In our organizations and in our teams and in the work we're doing, there's no single organization or single campaign or single initiative that's going to do everything we need. And so we need to, come together and do that sort of collaborative work and use the structure of the one, two, three in order to have that completeness and that rounded outness, and to not try to be doing everything in an unbalanced way. It's like I see like sort of an unbalanced stool, right? If it only has two legs, it's going to tip over. You need all three, and in order to like fully nourish the community. And nourish, I mean here to not just making like a bean, corn, and squash soup, but I mean like truly like have them feel um sustained and well and held. And it's like a little bit what I talked about in the last episode with orb weavers, of them being an indicator species, right? When we see that they are there, we can see that that ecosystem is working really well. And we want that too with our nutritional completeness, is the sense of things are working well, and the offering is complete together when we all come together and have this healthy ecosystem of offerings and understand our role in them. And as I briefly mentioned too in the beginning, is that by geography, by culture, the three sisters gets tweaked a little bit. So the Haudenosaunee approach is not the same as the Pueblo approach, and that's different from the Lakota approach. And so it's the same principle of farming in this way, of growing of this way, and nourishing in this way, and we adapt it to place. And that's why story-driven strategy is so important. I was on a call the other day with a client talking about this. Of so often I see, people say, "Oh, I have this rural health data. I'm going to like implement what they did in my community, and it's going to work." And it's like that data is beautiful and important, but you need that listening and that understanding and that story-driven strategy to complement that data, so that you can adapt specifically to the context you're going in. Because like that data, it like that the community it came from is not a copy and paste then into the community you're coming to. And this is especially true as we're changing geographies. Is culture matters so much, preference matters so much, understanding matters so much, how things go. And if we're coming in and not understanding that culture and what people want and need, and how they see them, how they see health, and how they define health, and what makes them feel cared for and advocated for and provided for and healthy, then we're just we're doing a huge disservice. So we have to do that site specific adaptation that the three sisters do so well. And it's just such a necessary part of um of doing it well, of implementing something that is truly nourishing, is truly sustaining. And it's just like I think the three sisters are a really like humbling reminder, right, of that balance, and that we can't outdesign this. There's 3,000 years of agricultural technology that have been refined by people paying attention to what actually works. And like that's what story driven strategy is, right? It isn't about clever ideas or, trying something, reinventing a wheel or things like that. It's about what's learning from what already knows how to thrive where it is, what's already working in the community, where already are these points of trust, and how do we support that once we deeply listen to the community and strengthen those systems that are already supportive and working, because that's where people are already going. That's where their trust is. That's where their health is. And our best approach at trust and coming together and getting access to the opportunity and the privilege of providing great care and providing great advocacy requires that sort of humility of saying we can't outsmart the community. We're not smarter than the communities we work in. We are the communities we work in, and we need to understand them in order to do the great work that we come to do and fulfill that mission and that vision and that purpose of the work that we came to do. So that's my spiel about the three sisters. And I wanted to close with a few questions to get you thinking. One is, what is your organization perhaps extracting from communities versus what is your organization returning to the soil? In this, instance, are you the corn that provides the structure, or the beans that nourish, or the squash that protects? Or if you look in your organization itself, is there one team that's the corn, one team that's the beans, one team that's the squash? Look at yourself as this sort of ecosystem, and also, when you think about the work you're doing as you're building strategy and plans forward and programs, are you planning in the right sequence or trying to do everything at once? And like that's so important. And so I've just so loved this series of, we talked about bees, of course, had to kick it off with bees. And then we talked about orb weavers. And here we are talking about three sisters, and we've got a number more species to come. One I'm really excited for is an upcoming episode that's also the topic of my a book that I wrote that's coming out that you can actually see. Maybe my head's blocking it, sitting in the basket behind me. And so you'll learn more about that in an upcoming episode as well as a part of this series. But I think so often, as I've said it in the other episodes, we can get so bogged down in being like, um, all the ways humans have done it, all the ways we've done it, all the way our teams have done it. And we forget that there's this whole world around us of species that can teach us and remind us how to do things in a good way, in a balanced way, and in the most effective way, right? Like effective, efficient, and also beautiful, which is one of the such a gift too, is that there's this beauty and this elegance in the way things happen in nature that, we want to do things that emulate that and feel like that sort of flow, and like this is how it was meant to be. This is how the work should feel, type of approach. So that's what I've got for you on the three sisters. Maybe a reminder, if you have siblings in your life, biological or chosen, you can give them a call and see who's. I've had this conversation. I'm one of six children, which is like the absolute joy of my life. And I've had this conversation with my siblings too about like who's who, and it changes all of the time. And that's a beautiful thing too, right? Is it's not a permanent state. You're not maybe permanently corn, but maybe you're holding this down for a little bit and then it changes over to another org or another team, and they hold that so you can get more in your bean phase or something like that. And so it's not this sense of like, I am this, I will always be this, but how can we let it flow, and how can we be at that natural change and adaptation that nature requires of us? And as little chunks of nature, we also require of each other, and our systems require of us to build systems that actually reflect the needs and desires and wants and health and justice of the people we're here to serve. So thank you so much. It's such an honor to have you here. I hope you'll be thinking about the three sisters for the next couple of weeks. And like I said at the top, if you want to snag one of those last few Story Lab sessions before we meet the middle of the year, reach out, let me know. I would love to get you on the calendar and just get you that beautiful little brief in your hands so that you can have that corn part of your journey done and move into the bean and squash of it, of having that structure, having that solidity in place, knowing what's possible, having those insights that I'm just so like seemingly designed to see, and then moving from there and really playing on the strengths of your team and your organization as you move forward and work to really connect with and serve the community that you are a part of. So let me know. Reach out anytime. I'm so glad you're here, and I will talk to you soon. All right. Take care.